So I'm here with my friend, Rabbi Sher.
Hi.
I'm so glad you could come, stop by. I understand you're going to Israel tomorrow for a couple of weeks.
Tomorrow morning.
And then back to Boston and out to San Francisco to do your one-year gig.
Right.
And you just brought me a copy of your new book. I'm going to hold it up so everyone can see it.
Growth Through Governance, what every Jewish nonprofit leader needs to know. And really what many non-Jewish nonprofit leaders also need to know.
So before we get into the book, let's just say we've known each other for years from Temple Beth Zion, and that you became a rabbi very recently. I attended your ordination at Harvard Divinity School, which was
wonderful to have you there.
Wonderful event. And you're one of the coolest rabbis, I must say, that I've ever known.
You know, I can't help it. I don't know.
Well, you're just a character.
I appreciate you saying that,
You're
Steve.
a character. People should, if you're interested after this interview, sign on to your email where you explain more about your background. I know you went to MIT, you had a tech business, but you're into helping people and love and healing the world.
Well, that's really what it's about. You know, it was... It's funny to look back on it because I actually had a very difficult time becoming a rabbi because of my views on interfaith marriage.
Let's start there.
So, you know, and which I'm in favor of. I really think that, you know, there's an argument that's made that if everybody went and married non-Jews, we wouldn't have a Jewish people, which, you know, is probably a good argument. I could see a critique, but more or less that's an acceptable argument. But that is the same argument and the same form of argument that was used against same-sex marriage. If everybody went and had, you know, married somebody of their same gender, we wouldn't have any more children.
I remember that.
Which is true. It was a flawed. It was flawed reasoning. And it was flawed then, it was flawed 20 years ago, it was flawed 200 years ago, it was flawed 2,000 years ago.
And I know gay people who have children.
Right, and there are gay people who have children,
right.
You know? And so that reasoning is flawed today. And I believe that what we need is a diversity Judaism, as opposed to a purity Judaism. We need to, you know, instead of having an attitude of saying, you know, how nice it is that everybody's the same and that everybody does exactly the same things and follows the same practices. We need a Judaism that says what a miracle it is that everybody's here together with all of their different ideas.
Yes.
And different practices and different ways of life. And that what a miracle that we're brought together by shared values. Instead of being brought together by shared practices. We may have friends whose practices radically differ from ours. We may have friends who observe a totally different way of being kosher, of eating Jewishly than we do. You know, we have people who don't keep kosher at all. We have people who keep very, very strictly kosher. And the miracle, to me, of liberal Judaism is that families and friends can be together without turning on each other, you know, without rejecting each other, and be together in difference and be able to say, you know, we're going to make a resolution that we're going to have lunch together.
Right.
You know, whether it be a food issue or a Shabbat or, you know, marriage or, you know, sexual orientation or any of these various ideas. We can be together, and we can affirm that each of us has a place at the Jewish table, and that's what really excites me.
Right. So, there's so many things I want to talk to you about. This is meant to be maybe an introductory video of many videos, but I know that you're familiar with my work at Freedom of Mind and
very inspired by it.
Very much agree with the principles of informed consent and ethical practice and freedom to join, freedom to leave, freedom to read what you want to read, freedom to talk to whoever you want to talk to, love-based, you know, spirituality versus fear and guilt-based stuff.
Right.
And so let's talk about your book, and let's talk specifically about ethics, because I know you're on a quest. In fact, we had a meeting with one of the Harvard Divinity School senior people about your desire to help bring more clarity about ethical behavior.
Right, and we're going to see that, and I actually am really very grateful to Professor Dudley Rose for having that meeting and for giving me a semester of time to think about that issue. Mm-hmm. You're going to see that in the book. If I could borrow this for a second.
Even though I bought it and you signed it.
It's this is definitely Steve's book. I can prove it. But just to borrow it for a moment, you're going to find in this book one of the strongest ethics essays in the nonprofit sector, and so
it's not just for Jewish business owners, it's for anyone who has a business.
No, and it's really, to tell you the truth, I sat down to write a book about synagogue governance, and I realized very, very quickly, like 10 pages into it, that this was going to be a lot more broadly applicable. So, my book often takes a synagogue example. It often takes other examples as well, from the nonprofit sector primarily. And 95% of this book is applicable to any house of worship, whether it be Jewish or not, and probably 90% or more is applicable to every nonprofit.
So let's talk specifically about ethics.
Yeah.
And you were saying about every board should know what and implement what.
Right. Well, so I've served on 8 different nonprofit boards, and
want to name a couple?
Sure. I was on my synagogue board in Seattle, Temple Beth Am, Reformed synagogue of about 850 families at the time. Still there, still doing great, and I'm in their Facebook group. I was on the board of also in Seattle the. It's called CAMP, the Central Area Motivation Program, which is actually the oldest community action agency west of the Mississippi River.
Okay.
And so CAMP serves a low-income clientele with a number of services from heating assistance paying for your electric bill.
Okay, so I'm going to take your word for 8 boards, substantial boards. So go on, what should people know?
Including some small organizations. I want board members to understand what's going on around them on a board. So one of the pitfalls is that people who are new to board service will hear a bunch of terminology and jargon and will sort of tune out. And I'll tell you why that's dangerous. But first I really want to kind of put a happy face on this. Board member is not required to be a subject matter expert. You can't possibly be a subject matter expert in every area that boards encounter. You can't possibly be the world's greatest accountant and the world's greatest manager and the world's greatest strategist and the world's greatest ethicist, and on and on and on.
You just have to be yourself.
You just have to be yourself.
To it.
And the point of having a board is to have several pairs of eyes on the questions that boards consider. So, so if you, viewer out there are on a board and you feel like, you're not quite sure of yourself or what's going on. First of all, the whole point of you being there is to bring a fresh perspective and a fresh pair of eyes. That's why good boards rotate their members. Boards that don't rotate their members lead to very bad situations. Stagnation at best. And
rubber stamping what the leader
says, and all the way down to, and let's not be embarrassed to talk about it, corruption and crime.
But you also talked about if there's jargony words that you don't understand, you should ask, what does this mean?
And what I've done in the book is I said, I wish I could write a letter to myself when I was just starting out serving on boards with what I would have liked to know. And have kind of gained along the way, including from some very good board trainings that I had the privilege of participating in. And so what I've done is I've written a letter to everyone else. Couldn't go back in time, but the emphasis of the book is on being comfortable asking questions and knowing the terminology and the concepts that underlie what boards typically do in nonprofit organizations. So that
you just hit on a freedom of mind core idea of asking questions.
Asking questions.
And
it is so important.
There's no bad question.
The only dumb question is the unasked question.
They remember that.
And unasked questions are really stupid questions.
And a lot of people don't ask because they don't want to be perceived as being ignorant.
Or they don't want to make waves, they don't want to cause trouble, and particularly when you get into a situation that may be ethically questionable. Very, very typically, and I've seen this in more than one organization, people will say, this is confidential, you can't talk about it, it's going to reflect badly on the reputation of the organization. And you know better than most, Steve, that we see that in religious organizations, and unfortunately we see it in Jewish organizations.
Yeah, all types.
All the time.
And part of the freedom of mind brand of what we're saying is you have a responsibility to listen to your conscience.
Right.
You have a responsibility to use your critical thinking. You have a responsibility to also seek outside to reality test. If you're in a closed system and you're not sure, you're confused, you're getting different messages, it's okay and ethical to get a second opinion.
Right, and it really is required. One of the things I said in my book, when it comes to those uneasy feelings about, hey, people are telling me to do X, Y, and Z, or maybe to take no action, and I just don't quite feel comfortable. That doesn't necessarily mean there's wrongdoing in the organization. It could mean that. And I want to be very, very unembarrassed and very forthright, and I want to invite everybody who's viewing this to just not be embarrassed at all to talk about these issues, because when we see them as embarrassing, and when we feel shame emotions, around talking about corruption and crime, that's when they start getting buried under the table, swept under the rug. And that's when we start seeing perpetrators reoffend because they've found a venue where they can do that. Now, I don't mean to say that crime is prevalent. I don't mean to say that every organization is going to see it. I don't mean to say that Judaism has a corruption problem. What I mean to say is that human nature is such that, this stuff crops up. And we have an awful lot of organizations in the Jewish community. It doesn't take a very high percentage, and outside the Jewish community, even more so, just because there are more organizations. It doesn't take a very high percentage for us to be seeing a pitter-patter of news articles over the past several years, right? Let me talk about one that was handled well.
Okay.
That is Congregation Sher Israel Orthodox in Washington, D.C., and I gave them a shout-out in my book.
Okay.
I was very moved, very inspired by what that board did. They faced a horrible situation that I would not wish on anybody. This was Barry Freundel. Remember Barry Freundel?
The rabbi?
The Peeping Tom rabbi. The rabbi had insisted on constructing a congregational mikveh. Good thing to do. But the rabbi had a video camera buried in an alarm clock in the mikveh. And he was convicted at the end of the day, I think, of 54 counts, something in the 50s. And there were like over 100 of them that couldn't be prosecuted because they were too old. But this guy had been at it for years. And I don't even want to go into who knew what when. I mean, you can do some research. But one thing I will say is when that board president found out about it, she called the police right away. And, and I really gave them a shout out. I said, imagine how many more people would have been victimized if they had dithered around and said, this is confidential, or we just don't, Rabbi Freundel is a great leader in the Orthodox community, which in fact he was a very well-respected leader, and that was part of the tragedy here. We can't. It's his word against yours, and nobody's going to take your word for it because he's a big name. And there are 1,001 reasons to dither around. Watchful waiting. There's. Let's wait and see. Let's gather more information. Let's do our own internal investigation. Maybe we can handle this internally. Maybe we can censure the person or something. Let's go about the amateur hobby of getting information ourselves and playing police, in a confidential proceeding within our organization. And if that board had done that, faced with the clear evidence they had, now I'm not talking about rumors or whatever, I'm talking about there is a video camera in an alarm clock in the mikveh. the situation would have continued.
Right.
And they didn't let that happen. They called the police. And I am just so moved. It must have been so hard to do.
Right. So I'm on the board of the Child Friendly Faith Project, which is looking after children's rights, protect them from pedophiles, protect them from getting the medical treatment if they're minors, against corporal punishment, etc. And so one of the issues is what happens if someone joins your congregation as a known sexual predator. How do you handle that? And there's no policies that are clearly published and where temples are trained, and that's part of what we're trying to do is raise a consciousness. And then what happens if the person leaves that congregation, goes across the street to another congregation, or goes to another state, or goes to another country? What obligations do we have to warn other congregations about this predator? It's not a simple thing. I'm not pretending that we can get to the bottom of it today in terms of our talks, but I also want to ask you about, we had a conversation where you said, look, if you're the rabbi, it's never okay to have a sexual relationship with a congregant. Could you say a few words about that?
I did say that. We're in a time period in Jewish history where we're really kind of considering this issue. I was trained at Harvard Divinity School. Harvard Divinity School gets all of the first year, candidates for the Master of Divinity in a big auditorium and says, all right, we're sending you out on internships. If there's even an inkling that you invited somebody out to dinner who was your patient in a hospital, you're out of this school. So
that clear.
Very, very clear. And those are really my values. I address it in the book. I actually do talk about that. There's a conflict of interest issue. There's a power issue. I think...
Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Well, let's start with conflict of interest. Like I said, in my book, I really emphasize concepts. I want everybody to have a strong grounding in ideas that underlie what's going on so that they can ask questions.
Right.
Okay? So a conflict of interest happens when somebody has what's called a fiduciary duty. They have a duty, an ethical duty to act in an organization's best interest or in a person's best interest. So a board member has a fiduciary duty to their organization. They are not allowed to act as a board member in any other interest than the interest of their organization that they serve on the board of. A rabbi has a fiduciary duty to congregants, a congregational rabbi. So if you're hired by a congregation to be of pastoral care, you really do incur a fiduciary duty to the well-being of those congregants, and you don't just kind of go at it with whatever you think. You have to really consider what's best for the person who's here. So conflicts of interest happen all the time.
And I might add, from the cult point of view, that there are large group awareness trainings, some that are infiltrating the Jewish community that have a different agenda. And if they can get senior members of the community or a rabbi to become a member of one of these large group awareness trainings, and then they start recruiting congregants.
What's a large group awareness training?
Well, one of the most famous ones was EST, that became Landmark Forum.
Oh yeah, I know about Landmark.
Another one was LifeSpring. I mean, they're not going to like it that I'm even mentioning names, but this is a group where you get people together in a hotel ballroom for a weekend for many, many hours.
Right. We're living a life we love and living it powerfully.
Right, or that you are God and you create your own reality. So why did
they wanted a $500 intro fee, and I was like, you guys know.
Well, the more money they can get you to pony up, the more that you want to believe
that's
it.
That's a neat trick.
It's a neat trick. But the point is I see it all the time with therapists, where therapists have a duty to their clients or patients, and then they get recruited into something, and they think they're going to be helping their clients by teaching them TM,
I see.
Or they're going to bring them to some other thing.
Oh, I see. I don't know.
I don't know about all the different. Well, they're violating. They're doing a conflict of interest thing, where they didn't do their due diligence before they went.
You
So
really, I don't know anything about TM.
Transcendental meditation is in my book,
Okay.
Combating Cult Mind Control. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the Beatles' so-called guru, even though John left and wrote 60 Sadie. Anyway, there's this whole dark side of TM, and yet they're in the schools. I know you're going out to San Francisco. They're apparently teaching TM to school children.
Yeah.
You know, because it's meditation. I have no problem with meditation, but I do when there's this other stuff.
I see agendas in the Jewish community too. I mean, I'm not going to get into who they are right now, but I do see certain sects always seeming to be where there's money.
Yeah.
You know, Harvard Business School is just somehow teeming with people that we never see at the Divinity School. Anyhow.
That's interesting too. So power,
there's
money, sex seem to be the three big areas.
So look, a conflict of interest is not the same as wrongdoing. Conflicts of interest happen constantly. Everybody is subject to conflicts of interest. So, so let me give you a more mundane example.
Okay, please.
Let's say I just published a book, and let's say I'm a congregational rabbi.
Right.
Okay? Selling my book to congregants in my congregation, and I want to start a congregation. I'm in the middle of trying to start a congregation in Silicon Valley. Okay? If I push my book on congregants, that's a conflict of interest.
Good point.
Now, I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying it's a conflict of interest. Because my interest in selling the book, I have a financial interest. That's a personal self-interest. And that is not the same interest as the best interest of whoever's there. Now, and this helps to analyze what you were talking about with the TM.
I'm an author, so I'm listening.
Right, so you're an author too. Right?
And
I may sincerely believe that buying my book is in the best interest of the person, right? Or going to TM or going to Landmark or whatever it may be. I may very sincerely believe that. It may even be true. In the case of my book, I think it is true. In the case of some of these other things, maybe not, right? It's $500. All I know is the $500 intro fee is a little steep.
That's the beginning.
It's just, I bet it is. But my point is, the book is a pretty mundane example. Like, there's nothing really wrong here. It may very well be true, but it's still a conflict of interest because I have a self-interest that does not permit me to be impartial in my assessment of what is in a congregant's best interest.
Good, sure.
So when I have a conflict of interest, it needs to be disclosed.
Okay.
That is, disclosure and sunlight are the are the ways...
antiseptic.
Are the antiseptic, thank you. To handle
So how do you ethically promote a book that you've written? Because that's what I do.
Right.
But I tell people you could be helped. If you don't want to buy it, go to the library and read
Sure.
it.
Well, and you're not a congregational rabbi.
True.
But were I a congregational rabbi, or let's suppose, again, I'm a manager, and I have a management duty, in which case my fiduciary duties to the organization, but selling my book to my direct reports is not part of my fiduciary duty,
Right.
So I disclose it. I say, look, you guys, I wrote a book. I'm selling the book. That is... I'm not going to push the book. I just want to have the air clear between you and me.
Right.
You
won't like them any less if they don't buy your book.
I won't like you any less if you don't buy my book.
How about if you buy it and don't read it?
If you buy it and don't read it, I won't like you any less.
I'm going to try to read it. I promise.
All right, we'll make a deal together.
I just have a long pile of
me
books to read.
Me too.
Right.
We'll make a deal. Right. If you don't like the book, maybe you think something I said is wrong, I'm not going to like you any less. I welcome that. When that starts to be false, that's a problem. And I may have to take other steps to mitigate the conflict of interest.
Good.
But for right now, I'm disclosing. And if anybody has a concern, the concern needs to be talked about.
Great.
Okay?
Just for the interest of time, let's go on to, we did conflict of interest. Let's talk about power and sex.
Yes. So... there's a power imbalance in a relationship where one person in the relationship is a professional, be it a rabbi or a therapist or anybody, and the other person is we call it in helping professions a care seeker. Marilyn Peterson wrote a fantastic book about this that I just recommend. It's At Personal Risk, Boundary Violations in Professional Relationships. Fantastic book. Marilyn Peterson. And Peterson, again, teaches this ethic that a caregiver, a professional caregiver, okay, I'm not talking about, your mother, but a professional caregiver has a fiduciary duty to care seekers and needs to be aware that care seekers come to caregivers. Caregivers are in limited supply. Right. They develop attachment. They develop, there starts to be, when attachment goes, I think, a little bit too far, there starts to be a sense that, this person can't do wrong. Whatever they say is wise. Thank you. Putting them on a pedestal, idealization. Those things are sometimes part of a professional practice. And those of us who are professionals need to be very, very careful of them. And we need to get off that pedestal as soon as we feel like somebody's putting us on it.
Yeah.
But
that's why I do very short-term therapy with people or work with people and move them on to other caregivers.
I've had folks come to me and say, you're sort of a holy rabbi, and it's like, I see myself as a person. That kind of ethic helps, but it doesn't solve the problem. A professional is still in a position of power.
And
to keep it to my profession,
people project onto.
To keep it to my profession, rabbis make decisions for people. Even rabbis who don't believe in halachic, decision making end up making decisions. People come for advice, you give advice, and that's power. So if I then try to twist somebody's arm to buy my book, or to, let's say I attach a $1,000 initiation fee, some sort of service to my book, right? And people have the sense that they will get more access to me as a professional because access is limited if they pay the money, right? That is an abuse of power.
How about a Kabbalah center selling a red piece of thread for $26 because it'll keep you safe from the evil eye? Or molecularly changed Kabbalah water that will heal you, so you don't need to go to the doctor.
Yeah, honey, don't drink molecularly changed water. Stick to H2O. I don't know what the heck is in molecularly changed water.
They say the rabbi prays and meditates,
by definition, water.
So it makes happy water that resonates, the vibratory,
so
frequencies.
My message to people out there is that if it's dihydrogen oxide, you're good to drink it. If it's somehow
too technical
for me. If it's somehow changed, I'm just not sure.
Well, I don't think it's changed.
People will, that's right. I mean, you can get into selling all sorts of trinkets. If I'm really that holy, maybe I'm a very, very holy person, so a stitch of my clothing ought to be worth $1,000, and maybe I should just, take an old rag and cut it up.
A lot of the cult leaders I've dealt with would sell a lock of their hair.
A lock of hair.
Their nail.
Right.
Just ridiculous things.
Right.
So,
and that is an abuse of power because people are making bad decisions, and you're sort of selling. Let me draw a distinction. My book has some value.
I've asked you to do this interview because I want to promote you and your work.
But if it were rather, so the book costs $23. If it were rather some thread that costs $23, I mean, I would not counsel people to do that.
Safe from the evil eye, they said. That's the magical thinking piece.
Right. And I mean, I think that get all of that trinket sort of ology is very much, you're sort of getting people worked up into a tizzy over, devotion to a particular person or organization or concept, and then turning that around to turn it into financial sales. And I would say, yes, that's an abuse of power.
Great. So just in the interest of time, I'd like to wrap this interview up, and we'll do many other ones, but I guess I want to ask you to talk about your newsletter, talk about what your vision is. You're beginning your career, and what some of the unique aspects of it that you'd like.
Well, first of all, I've got a newsletter. You can sign up on thisisjudaism.net. We're starting with a low volume. We'll see how people like that. I'm always experimenting, and you can read in chapter 11 of my book, some tips about experimenting with nonprofit communications. So there's always, I like to have a very loose kind of philosophy of let's try this, let's try that, let's see how it performs. That's a very 21st century way of looking at it.
Being flexible is important.
Right. So this is Judaism.net. You'll see a link to subscribe to the newsletter. You'll see a link to pre-order the book. The book has a companion website at npgovernance.org.
Okay.
For the next 2 weeks,
for nonprofit
governance, okay. Right? Exactly.
I got it.
Yeah, NP governance. And very often within the book, I say, there isn't space to go into a lot of detail here, but if you want more reading, I've put a whole bunch of links on npgovernance.org.
Okay, so I'll add that link to the end of this interview as well.
And starting in mid-August, npgovernance.org will be a place where people can actually get an account and start commenting and engage with me about the subject matter of the book.
Great.
You asked me about my plan. I'm one of these people who has a lot going on. I'm going to be working as a chaplain this coming year in the mental health I requested the mental health practice. I don't know what I get assigned to until I start.
Okay.
But
you'll be in San Francisco.
I will be at UCSF Medical Center, working as a chaplain intern. It's kind of a post-ordination year that will hopefully lead to board certification as a chaplain.
So you get practical experience,
right?
And you get supervision as you're doing that.
What it is it's 4 professional education units in 1 year.
Okay.
So a more typical way of doing it is to do 1 unit in a year, and it's like a part-time. But this is sort of the full-time. So I'm really just going to be working. And I'm just going to be in the hospital every day from 8:30 to 4:30.
Okay.
Working with patients. I'm pretty excited about that. I really love mental health chaplaincy work. I don't know that I see that as exactly what I'm going to do for my entire career, but I really want to do it. And my challenge is to kind of figure out, exactly how best to serve given the talents that I have. But I really love working with that group of patients. I'm also going to be starting a small Jewish renewal congregation. Maybe it won't be that small in Silicon Valley. Strikes me as an underserved area. We'll see. And to start out with, I do believe that after the high holidays, we're gonna begin having a one Shabbat a month kind of meeting. And again, you'll find out about that on thisisjudaism.net. Where, by the way, there's also just a ton of resources. I do singable English translations of liturgy, and there's political views, and all that stuff is on thisisjudaism.net.
Well, I'm also excited about your work is that I know a lot of people like myself who grew up Jewish, got disillusioned in the way that we were taught about our Judaism. Got recruited into a cult deceptively, came out, did this journey of trying lots of different religions, and my sense is that a lot of people born Jewish who identify on some level as being Jewish would really relate to your. I just think of it as breathable, livable, love-based. Wisdom, tradition-oriented, values-oriented versus you got to do it this way or else you're in sin or something like that.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, my message is there's a place for you at the Jewish table. That's just what it is. You can come and take your seat. And
so if you're gay, you're welcome. If you have a history of mental illness, you're welcome.
Welcome to the club.
If you're just of another faith but are curious to learn about Judaism and want to expand yourself.
Right. If you're Orthodox, you're welcome. If you're
even
Orthodox, you're welcome. Absolutely. My publisher of this book is a guy that I met at the first ever conference on Israeli pastoral care, and he's a very, very observant Jew, and somebody who I'm really blessed to have crossed paths with. It's a great example. I mean, I don't always hang out with people whose, implementation of Judaism differs so much from mine for all sorts of reasons. But, Chaim's a really decent guy, and both of us, I think we disagree on a lot, to tell you the truth. But both of us kind of came up with, I'm cool doing business with you if you're cool doing business with me, and two of those makes a business deal, and I'm very, very pleased to be working with him, and I'm pleased to be on his, list of authors.
Great. So thank you. Have a wonderful, safe trip. Stay in touch. We'll do some more of these.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks. See ya.